Double Coca-Cola. God of surprises, you never cease to amaze us with the challenges that come our way. The pandemic has greatly affected us and even weakens our confidence. We pray that you will give us more courage and enough strength to continue adapting and evolving, that not even this pandemic can prevent us from working for a society, a country, and even a world where peace and justice reigns. We ask this through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. Saint Joseph, pray for us.
Good morning, friends. On behalf of the Board of Trustees and Administration of FSUU, I welcome you to the third day of our Peace Conference. The themes for the two sessions today are also interesting. In the morning, we will listen to our speakers discuss about COVID-19, continuing health challenges, new conflict lines, and social dynamics of the new normal. In the afternoon sessions, we will hear the contribution of our speakers on the topic of peace education and digital divide during the time of COVID-19. Both themes are highly relevant to all of us as we are all affected by this pandemic. I would like to thank our main conference partner, Deutsche Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit, GIZ, for helping us in this endeavor. I sincerely hope that the sessions today will be fruitful and meaningful for all of us. Again, welcome everyone.
Morning everyone, maayong buntag sa tanan, magandang umaga. Welcome to the fifth session of the Mindanao Peace Studies Conference 6 of Father Saturnino Orius University in partnership with Deutsche Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit, GIZ. I am Father Joseph Alner Garrido from FSUU, your facilitator in this session. We wish to acknowledge our participants from various government and non-government agencies, as well as those coming from the academe, from the state universities and colleges, private higher education institutions, CEAP schools, and the Department of Education, who are joining with us via Zoom, Facebook, and YouTube. Thank you for being with us. We also acknowledge our speakers who will be introduced accordingly in a while. The theme for this fifth session, as pointed out by Father Randy's message, is COVID-19, continuing health challenges, new conflict lines, social dynamics of the new normal. We will now proceed to the presentations. To facilitate seamless flow in the online conference, let us follow session rules. All participants are encouraged to mute their microphones by the start of every session. The organizer also reserved the right for this action. For documentation, all the proceedings of the conference shall be recorded, and pictures will be taken during sessions. To ensure proper recognition, participants are encouraged to indicate their organization's acronym before their names upon signing in. Example, FSUU Jane de la Cruz. At this point, may I turn you over to our session moderator, Father James Michael Abellanosa.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. My name is Father James Michael Abellanosa, Father Michael from Father Citronino Urios University in Butuan City. I am your moderator for this session. We shall now proceed the discussion of reviews and mechanics for this session. Each speaker is given 20 minutes for her presentation. When each speaker's time is up, we will immediately proceed to the next presenter. After all the presentations, a short panel discussion shall follow, and then an open forum. For the open forum, the Zoom participants may write their questions. Those of you joining us through Zoom may write your question in the chat box. For those of you who are participating through Facebook and YouTube, you may likewise write your questions in the comment section. The Secretariat will keep track of your questions and will forward those questions to the moderator and to the facilitator. You may ask one direct, concise question and, if needed, one follow-up question. There will be documenters who will record the process and the questions raised for this session. May I now introduce to you our speakers. Our first speaker has been involved in volunteer works as a medical doctor in different parts of our country. From August 2017 to the present, she is the project manager and editor of the Doctors to the Barrios website. She graduated from the University of the Philippines, Manila College of Medicine, and finished her Master of Public Management, major in Health Systems and Development degree from the Development Academy of the Philippines. She has been serving in the province of Dinagat Surigao del Norte since 2016 and is currently the Provincial Health Officer 2 of Dinagat's Provincial Health Office. Everyone, may I present to you Dr. Jillian Frances A. Lee. Dr. Lee.
Good morning. Maayong
Morning.
buntag po sa tanan.
Maayong buntag.
Mag-start na ako.
Yes, please.
I-share ko ng aking presentation. Alright. Hi, hala. Nasaan ang aking share screen? So, muli, maayong buntag sa tanan. Maraming salamat sa invitation. Ako po si Dr. Jillian Lee. Ako po ang Provincial Health Officer ng Province of Dinagat Islands. Mula 2016 po ako ay nagtatrabaho in one form or another sa community and sa public health. Ang una kong laging sinasabi tuwing may work-related presentation akong ginagawa ay gusto kong i-change yung notions na meron ang karamihan ng tao tungkol sa health system natin. When people think about health systems kasi, kadalasan iniisip nila ang limited ito sa doktor, sa ospital, sa gamot, na lahat naman ito ay parts talaga ng health system. Pero, as is being made very clear today, ang bulk ng trabaho ng health system ay nangyayari sa labas ng health facilities, nangyayari sa labas ng realm ng health professionals, nangyayari sa ating mga communities. Ang totoong frontline ng public health ay ang community natin. At mas napapaghalata ito sa panahon ng pandemya. Kasi kung ang control ng ating kalusugan ay nasa health workers lamang at nasa mga doktor lamang, malamang sa malamang ang situation natin ngayon ay hindi magiging ganito. Ang WHO ay merong na-identify na 6 na tinatawag nilang building blocks of health. Ito ang mga components ng ating health system na gumagalaw at na kailangan nating ipagalaw para maayos ang pagpapatakbo ng sistemang pangkalusugan ng ating bansa and or ng ating mga probinsya, local government at ng ating mga communities. Ang pinaka-obvious dito sa mga ito ay ang health service delivery. Ito ang mismong pagbigay ng serbisyong pangkalusugan, ang pagpakonsulta, ang pagpa-check up, ang pagpapabakuna. Lahat ng nag-i-involve ng direct patient care ay nagpo-fall under sa health service delivery. Pero hindi pa pwedeng mawala din galing sa ating consciousness ay ang health workers na nagpo-provide ng care na ito. Hindi lang ang ating mga doktor at ang ating mga nurse, pero kasama ang mga midwife, ang ating mga medtech, ang mga barangay at community health workers na kadalasan nagsaserve on a volunteer basis. Na sa ngayon ay, tawag natin dito, kailangan hindi sapat na ma-ensure na nandyan sila, kailangan din na ma-ensure na sila ay well-equipped, alam nila kung ano yung mga tasks na kailangan nilang gawin, updated sila sa information na kailangan nilang gawin, capacitated sila na i-address ang mga needs ng kanilang mga communities. Sa ngayong panahon din ng COVID, nakikita kung gaano ka-essential ang ating mga barangay health workers, ang ating mga barangay health emergency response teams, kasi sa kanila nanggagaling ang bulk ng disease surveillance, sa kanila nanggagaling ang pagpapansin sa ating mga communities kung sino ang nagde-develop ng symptoms, sino ang hindi nagka-quarantine na dapat naka-quarantine. And most of these people ay hindi din naman, wala sila sa formal na structure ng ating health system, wala silang sahod na nakukuha na regular galing sa government. Ang ating health information system ay nakikita din and madaming strides na nagaganap sa past few months sa ating health information system. Hindi lang sapat na nakakakuha sila ng data, kailangan ma-ensure na good quality ang data, na kaya nating i-process, kunin ang data na ito at i-process at ilabas in a way na nakukuha mo yung information na kailangan mo para gumawa ng mga desisyon tungkol sa public health, tungkol sa interventions na kailangan natin gawin. And nakikita din ngayon ang mga weaknesses sa existing natin na data infrastructure. Ang mga problema sa ating paper-based reporting na kadalasan kung ikaw ay may bagong patient, may bagong case na i-report, matagal pa ang process bago ma-consolidate ang data na ito sa level sa national level, sa level ng National Department of Health. And ang mga delays na ito ay nag-lead din sa mga delays sa paggawa ng desisyon kung kailan magsasarado, kailan mag-recommend na magbukas, saan ang mga high risk na lugar. Ang natin dito ay sa contact tracing na madaming applications na nagde-develop pero kung hindi sila interoperable sa isa't isa, kung hindi nila kayang mag-communicate sa isa't isa, na ang data na nakukuha mo ay hindi niyo kayang i-consolidate, hindi kayang i-report ng maayos, baliwala din ang pagkuha ng good quality data. Sa medicines and technology, important hindi lang ang pag-develop nito, ang access, aside sa pag-develop nito, important din ang access kasi ang gamot, hindi niya dinideliver ang kanyang sarili, may doctor at nurse na nade-deliver nun. This also brings into the question yung manufacturing, ang pag-supply chain. Naranasan din namin dito sa province of Dinagat Islands, kay isa kaming geographically isolated and disadvantaged area. Ang mismong process ng pagdating dito ng normal medications and normal vaccines ay medyo mahirap. Madaming proseso na pinagdadaanan, na-affect ito ng weather, na-affect ito ng dagat. Mas lalo na sa mga bagay-bagay na kailangan mo on an emergency basis, ang pag-procure ng emergency PPE, in the event na mag-develop ng bakuna, isa pa siyang malaking question ng tamang supply chain management. Sa financing, kailangan i-address syempre kung saan nanggagaling ang pera na kailangan mo para i-fund ang healthcare system mo. At ang laging nakakalimutan ng mga tao, hindi lang health workers, hindi lang ang health professionals ang nagde-decide ng ang ating health outcomes, ang ating kapalaran. Ang governance natin sa health, ito ang nagde-dictate ng ating mga health policies. At ang policies ay ang nag-shape ng hindi lang ang health system natin, pero pati ang society, ang conditions kung saan nakatira ang ating mga tao, ang conditions na nagbibigay sa kanila na nag-influence ng lahat ng kanilang hindi lang ang kanilang kalusugan, pero ang conditions na nag-influence ng kanilang behaviors, kanilang attitudes towards health, and ang kanilang, in the end, ang kanilang health outcomes. Ang marami tayong inequity sa health at lalo itong na-exacerbate, lalo itong napalala ng COVID-19. Madami tayong existing na structural failings sa health system na lalong napapaghalataan dahil sa COVID-19 at ang mga inequities na ito ay hindi lang nag-exist sa loob ng health system. Ito ay nag-uugat sa mga problema sa mismong society natin. Hanggang ngayon, ang mga communicable diseases na tulad ng pneumonia, tulad ng TB, major na cause ng mortality sa ating lahat. Mataas pa rin ang ating maternal deaths. Malayo tayo sa tina-target ng Millennium Development Goals na mabawasan by 75% ang maternal mortality rate. And wala pa rin, and even with the RH law, kulang pa rin ang ating universal access to reproductive health. And malaki din ang ating inequities sa loob ng ating mismong health system. Ang public health system natin, alam naman nating lahat, kulang ang tao, kulang ang funding. Ang 30% ng ating health workforce ay nasa government health services and they serve 70% ng population. Ang bulk din ng ating health facilities and ng ating health workers ay nasa urban areas, naiiwanan pa rin ang ating rural areas, and karamihan ay nag-i-exist sa loob ng private health system. Ang frontliners din natin, aside from the fact na may mga lugar tulad sa Dinagat Islands na dahil sa hindi kagandahang quality of life at hindi kagandahang quality of education ay konti lang ang aming frontliners, karamihan pa rin, reality pa rin sa atin na karamihan ng ating frontliners ay nagsisialisan galing sa bansa natin. Hindi nila nakukuha yung compensation na kailangan nila, hindi nila nakukuha yung support na kailangan nila, hindi natin sila hanggang magpatuloy na ganito ang ating pag-treat sa kanila, hindi din natin sila kayang pigilan na umalis at maghanap ng pangkabuhayan elsewhere. So, papag-usapan ko lang saglit ang aking probinsya. Kasi ang province sa Dinagat Islands ay isang geographically isolated and disadvantaged area. Isa siyang isla, nasa gitna siya ng Surigao at nasa gitna ng Surigao at ng Leyte. Ang population namin ay basically pang isang, more or less, siguro isang barangay lang siya sa Metro Manila. 127,000 lang, divided sa 7 na munisipyo. Tulad ng healthcare system sa buong Pilipinas except for ARMM, devolved ang healthcare system namin. So, lahat ng direct service provision, ng pag-acquire ng gamot, ang pag-hire ng health human resources ay responsibility ng ating municipal and provincial local governments and ng ating provincial and municipal health offices. Pero dahil nga medyo may pagkukulang or rather madaming pagkukulang ang funding na kailangan namin. Sa buong probinsya, hindi na yan 15, 16 na yan. Proud na ako dyan. 16 lang ang physicians na sa buong province na nagmamanage dito sa ating 127,000 population. 3 ang aming district hospitals na accredited bilang infirmaries, 7 ang aming rural health units. ang pag-hire ng regular employees ng local government unit ay limited ng budget ng kanilang mga local government units. Usually ang isang municipality, isang nurse lang yon, a couple of midwives, ang mga barangay health workers, tinatrain natin sila, kinakapacitate natin sila, pero usually hindi din assured ang kanilang security na magiging barangay health workers nila kasi madalas na pag bagong election, may ma-elect na bagong kapitan sa kanilang barangay ay napapalitan sila. So baka nasasayang, or hindi naman nasasayang, pero nasasayang yung pag-invest ng time and ng effort sa pag-build ng capacity nila kasi wala din tayong assurance na sila pa din yung magsaserve sa community 3 years later. Ang conditions na ito sa province of Dinagat Islands ay hindi lang dahil may pagkukulang ang health system namin at madaming pagkukulang ang funding at ang prioritization ng gobyerno sa pangkalusugan, siya din ay affected ng ating social determinants. Kulang ang ating doktor kasi kulang ang nakakatapos ng pag-aaral dahil hindi sila nakakapag-aral. Kung nakakapag-aral man sila, hindi well-equipped enough ang mga eskwelahan, hindi kagandahan ang kondisyon, kulang ang guro na nagtuturo, at ngayon na tayo ay based sa module-based learning and online learning, medyo wala kaming infrastructure for those. Hindi lang naman ang individual na conditions ng isang tao ang nakaka-affect ng kanilang health outcomes. Ang kanilang constitutional factors ay nakaka-apekto ng kanilang health, and ang kanilang lifestyle factors, ang kanilang behavior, ang kanilang risk-seeking behaviors nila. Pero ito lahat ay na-affect ng kanilang communities, ng kanilang living conditions, and sa overall na socio-economic conditions. Ito lahat ay nakaka-affect ng kalusugan ng kada individual na tao, at ito din lahat ay nakaka-affect ng kung paano mo i-develop ang iyong health system. So, shucks. Sorry. Sa ngayong panahon, kailangan, of course, lahat tayo ay nagtatry na mag-adjust sa pandemic as much as possible. Pero limited, even though gumawa ka ng attempts na i-change ang behavior ng tao, una sa lahat, hindi naman yan nagagawa overnight. Kailangan ng maayos na risk communication, kailangan mo ng time para i-build up ang awareness level ng mga tao sa community, kailangan ng constant na pag-relate ng information na hindi lang siya galing sa amin, pero galing sa mga, aside from clear na explanations at clear na pag-updates galing sa authorities about sa ating mga problema sa pandemya at sa ating mga interventions na ginagawa, kailangan din na sa level ng community, kaya nila itong i-communicate sa isa't isa. Limited lang din naman ang official na channels. Sa aming setting din ay hindi naman lahat ng tao ay may internet at hindi naman lahat ng tao ay may television. So dumadaan siya, ang bulk pa rin ay dumadaan sa word of mouth, dumadaan sa pagbandilyo. And ang gumagawa naman na ito ay ang mga tao sa community. So kailangan mo ng adequate na base ng tao na kayang i-communicate ang mga problems na ito. And aside from that, kailangan na yung conditions nila ay nagfa-facilitate na gumawa na tama ang kanilang behavior. Hindi lang sa community, pati sa workplace, kung kayang gumawa ng intervention sa occupational health para ma-prevent ang kasi kadalasan nga ang outbreaks nga natin ay from household or from the workplace. kailangan ma-address ang working conditions, kailangan ang interventions ay nagka-cut across sa iba't ibang sektor na hindi lang sa health pero pati sa labor and employment, involved ang mga major na sources of major na businesses sa inyong lugar. Hindi lang important ang integrated na data reporting system sa mga communities and sa mga workplaces para makagawa ka ng tamang disease surveillance, kailangan din ang infrastructure na nag-enable na magawa ang mga bagay na ito. And of course, in the long term, kailangan din natin i-consider ang livelihood ng mga tao kasi ang complaint nga nila ay kung hindi nga sila mamatay sa COVID, mamamatay sila sa gutom, na hindi ang livelihood natin ay oriented sa basically na kayang i-provide ng mga tao ay ang kanilang mga pangangailangan. So sa ngayon sa Dinagat, aside from sa minahan, nakakita kami ng shift sa agriculture tsaka sa fisheries, ang pag-provide ng economic stimuli para sa mga farmers tsaka sa mangingisda ay hindi lang nakatulong sa pag-provide ng livelihood sa kanila, pag-ensure na sila ay nagko-continue, kasi ang pag-ensure na sila ay nagko-continue na magsaka at mangisda ay nag-i-ensure din na meron kayong food security, na hindi kayo magkukulang ng pagkain sa loob ng inyong probinsya, hindi kayo magiging dependent din sa pagbili galing sa labas. So makikita mo yung shift sa orientation ng mga tao na hindi lang sila based sa tourism, based sa pagpasok ng income galing sa labas, pero napapaikot ang tawag natin dito, ang local economy nila. So nakikita natin ngayong panahon ng COVID-19 ang importance hindi lang ng lahat ng components ng health system. Ang importance ng lahat ng components ng health system. Hindi naman magiging effective ang interventions at ang actions na based lang sa iisang block ng ating health systems. Pero aside from that, kailangan din i-address ang conditions na nagbibigay ng vulnerability sa tao to begin with. So hindi lang natin kailangan na bawasan ang unequal na consequences ng illness, na ang mga tao na taga-Dinagat ay hindi nakakapagpa-ospital kasi wala namang level 1 hospital sa Dinagat, ang meron lang kami ay infirmaries. Pero kailangan din ma-reduce ang disadvantages, ang vulnerabilities ng mga communities na mas napapahamak ng pandemya. And in the end, kailangan din natin i-reduce ang inequities, ang conditions na nagbibigay ng mga disadvantages na ito. Nagsisimula ito sa governance at sa policy, pero hindi siya natatapos dyan. In the end, natatapos din siya sa ating mga communities. Ang pangkalusugan ay hindi siya nag-i-exist sa isang vacuum. Lahat ng sectors, lahat ng sectors ng government, lahat ng sectors ng society ay involved in different ways sa pag-develop hindi lang ng health system pero ng society na may structure na hindi naglalagay ng one person or another or one community or another, whether dahil sa geographic location, whether dahil sa kanilang income, whether dahil sa kanilang risk sa trabaho, at a disadvantage compared to any other. So, sa ngayong, tawag natin dito, ngayong COVID-19 pandemic, opportunity din ito na i-restructure ang ating pagtingin sa health system na bilang hindi lang siya responsibility ng health professionals and ng health workers, at na hindi siya nagsisimula at nagtatapos sa nakita mo yung pasyente, pinagamot mo yung pasyente, pinagaling mo yung pasyente at pinauwi mo siya. Kasi papauwiin mo lang din siya sa conditions na nagbigay sa kanya ng sakit to begin with. So, maraming salamat. Kung may questions kayo, I'm just here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, for your presentation. We shall now proceed to our second speaker for this session. Our second speaker hails from Cagayan de Oro City and is a lawyer. She has been a women's rights advocate, and she has been handling pro bono cases on violence against women and children. She also advocated for gender sensitive policies, women entrepreneurship, and protection of women against sexual harassment in the workplace, and many others. She is currently Executive Director of the Philippine Commission on Women. May I now present to you our second speaker, Attorney Christine Rosary Ioson Chavez. Attorney Chavez, please.
In behalf of the Philippine Commission on Women, we wish to thank the Father Saturnino Orius University through Reverend Father Randy Jasper Ochige for inviting PCW to share its inputs on peace building. This morning, we wish to share with you the role of women in peace building and what we can do to promote women's participation. It has been said that women are weavers. In times of conflict, they play significant roles in fixing the fabric of the community. With them, ensuring gender sensitivity and conflict management, longer and lasting peace can be achieved in rebuilt societies. While there is limited statistical research linking women's participation and durable peace, a lot of studies point this out. Caprioli, Nielsen, and Hudson in Women and Post-Conflict Settings examined several cases and provided evidence that post-conflict peace is more durable when women take part directly in negotiations. Here, we will lay down 7 major roles of women in peace building. First, women ensure that conflict management is gender responsive. Conflicts more often than not breed gender issues and aggravate discrimination against women. With women sitting at the peace table, gender issues can be threshed out. Thus, with women working on sustainable peace, gender analysis can be used in conflict and peace, and both men and women in reshaping gender dynamics. Second, women comprise a large number in the population and influence can come with it. Women constitute half of every community, and the difficult task of peace building must be done by both men and women. It is expounded that in societies where women do comparatively better, prospects for successful peace building operations increase because women elicit broader domestic participation. Third, women sow unity instead of division, inclusion instead of discrimination as part of their nature as weavers. Accord Insight, published by Conciliation Resources, states that women's peace efforts, like many civil society activities, often challenge gender dynamics in both formal and informal spheres by advocating consensus building instead of recrimination and inclusion instead of elite-dominated politics. These then have the effect of shaking structural challenges and inspire changes necessary for sustainable peace. It must be noted that inclusion, or ensuring that different perspectives are considered, including marginalized sections of community, is significant in pushing for sustainable peace. Women can widen the range of substantive issues on the table, promoting not just women's rights, but also social justice. Issues central to long-lasting, durable peace such as reconciliation, equality, and access to land can go unaddressed, but women can ensure that various sectors of the community are heard. Fourth, women can mitigate the gendered impacts of conflict. one of which is sexual violence. In 2019, the United Nations reported 2,838 cases of conflict-related sexual violence, of which 98% targeted women and girls. Another issue is that conflict affects women's maternal health. In certain conflict-affected or fragile states, maternal mortality is very high. Fifth, women's role in the family also resonate their part in peace building. Albeit a very traditional role, women are considered caretakers of families. Excluding them from peace building can have dire effects. A research study from the policy brief, Ways for Women to Participate in Peace Building, by the Australian government's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, noted that large-scale and sporadic fighting between government forces and insurgent groups in Mindanao over decades have led to displacement of communities, and these affected women and children. Respondents reported that they were unable to support families, children became out of school, and more women were forced to go abroad. Thus, women being at the center of most families can be instrumental in understanding and mitigating the effects of conflict on families. Sixth, women are innate advocates for peace. They are peacekeepers, relief workers, and natural mediators. Women strive to take a nonpartisan, unified, and consensus-based approach to achieve influence. For example, Accord Insight shared the story of women in Bougainville and Northern Ireland who organized forums and set up networks as a way to achieve strength through consensus and unity. In Sierra Leone, the Women's Peace Campaign rallied for negotiated settlement in the public domain in a non-confrontational manner, combining non-threatening events like prayer meetings to mobilize support with more direct measures like marches and meetings with government. As a result, a negotiated settlement became a respectable option for both the government and the rebels. Seventh, they bring peace beyond the negotiating table. Women have contributed to ending violence and lessening its consequences in various ways, organizing humanitarian relief, creating the space for negotiations through advocacy, and wielding influence through cultural or social means. They have also spearheaded civil society and reconciliation activities. Despite these substantial roles, women remain sidelined and devalued in peace-building efforts. According to data from the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, in 26 conflict-affected countries, the United Nations has verified 102 killings of women, human rights defenders, journalists, and trade unionists from 2015 to 2019, a likely undercount. Also, data from Council on Foreign Relations between 1992 and 2019, women constituted on average 13% of negotiators, 6% of mediators, and 6% of signatories in major peace processes worldwide. And still, about 7 out of every 10 peace processes did not include women mediators or women signatories. The United Nations Security Council also reports that as of August 2020, women accounted for 41% of the senior leadership of special political missions and peacekeeping operations. This is an increase from 21% in 2017 when the strategy was launched. Indeed, there are still challenges that hinder women from participating in peace building despite their skills, insights, and energy. Cultural pressures against women putting themselves forward prevent them from joining public arenas. There can also be a lack of resources, such as lack of access to employment opportunities and to productive assets such as land, capital, health services, training, and education. Moreover, women's movements do not have established mechanisms to monitor and evaluate the implementation of the gender agenda in post-conflict settings. In the Philippines, women peace builders have been instrumental in negotiations and talks. Some of them include Teresita Ging Delies, presidential advisor in the peace processes since 2010. We also have Miriam Coronel Ferrer, chairperson of the Philippines Government Peace Negotiating Panel for talks with the Moro Islamic Liberation Front since 2012. She is the first woman to be a signatory to a major peace agreement. We also have Yasmin Busran Lao, member of the Philippine Government Peace Negotiating Panel for talks with Moro Islamic Liberation Front since 2011. We have also Irene Santiago, CEO of the Mindanao Commission on Women, member of the Philippines Government Peace Negotiating Panel for talks with the Moro Islamic Liberation Front from 2001 to 2004. She is also the senior advisor to the Presidential Advisor on the Peace Process from 2006 to 2008. Irene Santiago, in her paper, The Participation of Women in the Mindanao Peace Process, said that the Mindanao Peace Process is notable for the high level of meaningful participation by women in both the formal negotiations and parallel peace-building efforts undertaken at a social level. In the study entitled Women's Participation and Inclusive Peace Processes, Lessons Learned from Mindanao and Beyond, lessons regarding the importance of understanding and being sensitive to culture and politics were laid down. Promoting women's participation in the Mindanao context seemed challenging due to conservative and patriarchal customs that limited women's active agency in public and political affairs. However, women's role in the peace talks still expanded as part of increasing emphasis on inclusiveness and civil society engagement more broadly in the Philippines. Yet women's participation was achieved by grounding efforts to promote it in a pragmatic understanding of and engagement with resistant attitudes and beliefs. For one, independent organization Conciliation Resources and others used the process of listening and observation in order to identify potential windows for change and opportunity. Conciliation Resources invited a Muslim woman peace negotiator from ASE to share her experience with women in Mindanao and produced a publication on the role Muslim women have played in peace processes in other contexts. These provided women as well as male power holders with practical references from other Muslim contexts for women's participation, focus group discussions, trainings, and forums for women from different social, ethnic, and political backgrounds to draft a common agenda were also organized. Women's participation in peace building must be highlighted more, especially during what we are facing right now, the COVID-19 pandemic. As we know, gender inequalities are exaggerated by the combination of conflict and crisis. The indirect impact of the pandemic in conflict zones is likely to disproportionately affect women, especially gender-based violence. Thus, now more than ever, we must push for the participation and representation of women not only in peace building but also in addressing problems brought about by the pandemic. The United Nations Security Council reported that many of the best examples of leadership during the pandemic have come from women. Yet women lead only 7% of the countries. The results of a survey of 30 countries with COVID-19 task forces and committees showed that on average only 24% of members were women. In conflict-affected countries, the representation of women on COVID-19 task forces is even lower at 18%. We forget to consider that at its core, the Women in Peace and Security agenda is a crisis prevention agenda. In conflict-affected countries, women's groups have demonstrated that they are vital leaders in emergencies and they can maintain social cohesion and preventing further conflict and instability. They have the community's trust and outreach capacity critical when managing public health messaging through a pandemic. Women partaking in peace building during the pandemic can also ease the gendered impacts of the same. This includes the double burden on women for unpaid care and domestic work. In several conflict-affected countries, women perform 3 to 7 times as much unpaid care and domestic work as men. Gender-based violence is also aggravated with implemented community quarantine measures where victim survivors are locked down with their perpetrators. With women sitting at conflict and crisis management tables, these issues will be addressed and not sidelined. The Philippine Commission on Women, as the national machinery influencing efforts towards gender equality and women's empowerment, continues to promote the implementation of existing laws related to women, peace, and security, as well as inspire actions against gender issues aggravated during the pandemic. For one, we call for and monitor efforts towards the full implementation of the Magna Carta of Women. Section 29 provides that the peace process shall be pursued with the following considerations. First, increase the number of women participating in discussions and decision-making in the peace process, including membership in peace panels, recognizing women's role in conflict prevention and peacemaking and indigenous system of conflict resolution. Second, ensure the development and inclusion of women's welfare and concerns in the peace agenda in the overall peace strategy and women's participation in the planning, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of rehabilitation and rebuilding of conflict-affected areas. Third, the institution of measures to ensure the protection of civilians in conflict-affected communities with special consideration for the specific needs of women and girls. Fourth, include the peace perspective in the education curriculum and other educational undertakings, and the recognition and support for women's role in conflict prevention, management, resolution, and peacemaking, and in indigenous systems of conflict resolution. Under the National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security, the PCW must ensure that women take part in peace building through the following tasks, among others. Monitor progressive developments of the number of women and their contributions to various peace negotiation tables. Monitor the inclusion of gender-sensitive provisions in peace agreements and implementing blueprints and mechanisms. Contribute to supporting various initiatives of women's CSOs and grassroots women's groups supporting the peace process. Assist in the conduct of capacity development programs on conflict transformation, governance, and women's human rights. Technical assistance and support for various initiatives of lead and implementing agencies. Strategize on increasing the number of women from the security sector in various international initiatives related to WPS. Aside from PCW, may we all work collectively in making sure that our women peace builders, weavers of our community, have the opportunities and resources to contribute in achieving peace. Thank you.
Thank you for your lecture, Attorney Christine Rosary Eoson Chavez. She is currently in another location, and we hope that she could join us and connect with us during the panel discussion and for the questions raised by our participants. At this point, may I introduce our last speaker. Our last speaker is a graduate of the University of the Philippines, Manila College of Medicine, and has been interested in different fields of studies and researches, including her research, an in vitro study on the cytotoxic activity of eucoidans from Philippine sargassum species against colon cancer. Gifted with plenty of computer and technology-related skills, among others, she is currently serving as Medical Officer 3 of the Philippine General Hospital in Taft Avenue, Manila. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present to you Dr. Angeli G. De Jesus. Dr. De Jesus.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning po. We
Hello.
can hear you well. Yes.
Good morning. I'll just share my screen.
Yes, please.
Okay. So there. Can you see na po? Okay. So I'm Dr. Jesus, as was mentioned. I'm currently a resident in training in a public tertiary hospital here in Manila. So I'm in no way an expert in public health or even in surgery because I'm still in training, or I'm not even an expert in COVID. But I am a doctor or a surgeon who sees patients every day, and I've been seeing patients every day since the pandemic has started until now. So I can give you my unique perspective as a surgeon in the time of COVID. So this will mostly be an anecdotal presentation. Before the pandemic, this was my life. So mostly I was dealing with patients in the emergency room. So here in this picture in the lower left, you can see that our hospital was a very high volume hospital. So usually we have our patients overflowing. So yung stretchers namin very stacked, tabi-tabi yung patients, minsan two patients per stretcher, and then that would even extend to the hallways outside. So this is me in the middle going on duty in the hospital. So even that we're so high flow that even when I myself am sick, I still have to show up for work. And then the setup in the hospital is me. I'm very dependent on the students, the interns and the clerks to help me in the ER. So, other than being in the ER, obviously I'm a surgeon. So, my happy place is in the operating room where I get to cut people open and then fix them by cutting them back, then sewing them back together. So, that was my role in life in the hospital. And then also the other things that we got to do, everyone got to do before the pandemic was to spend time with our family and friends. But during sometime earlier in this year, all of a sudden, the pandemic came. COVID came, and that affected everyone's lives. So, me as a surgeon, I'll be sharing how that affected our surgical practice. So, when the pandemic came, we were mandated by the government to become a COVID referral center. So, all of a sudden, our ER was closed. We had to send home our patients in the wards. So all of the, I remember as in super suddenly, I was on duty in the emergency room. I had to send home all of my patients in the middle, all of my students in the middle of the night because they had to be protected also from the pandemic. They weren't covered by insurance or anything the hospital could provide to protect them. We also had to send home our patients who were actually for operation the next day. All of a sudden, our hospital was empty and you could only accept COVID-19 cases. So, anong ginawa ng surgery during that time? Because COVID-19 is, as everyone knows, it's not a surgical problem. So, yung all of a sudden, our whole department was useless. Wala na kaming maoperahan. So, anong nangyari sa amin, here the picture on the left, naging call center agent ako, yung department namin. So, instead of operating on patients, naging taga-coordinate kami from other hospitals trying to get their patients admitted into our hospital. And then the other thing that I had to do was go on COVID duty. So, as a surgeon, I have really not a lot of experience with taking care of just medical patients, but we had to step up to the plate and do what was necessary, even if it was uncomfortable for us. But on the brighter side, we had a lot of donations coming in. So unlike the first presenter, Jill, who's actually my classmate from med school, she's in a low resource setting. My hospital is very high resource and we got a lot of donations. So we were able to get a lot of PPEs and even food during the start of the pandemic. So we never lacked for those things. However, there's still a big inequity when it comes to healthcare when the pandemic happened because as a surgeon, on my perspective, all of the patients that we would have operated on were not cared for, so they had to go home. ORs were canceled. What does this mean for our patients? Um, for example, we have breast cancer patients who would have been for chemotherapy or for operation. They went months without being seen by a doctor. So nag-recur yung mga cancer ng pasyente. So some of the patients went from having no palpable masses, nagkaroon ng their next checkup was 3 months later, biglang nagkaroon ng 8 centimeter mass. And the worst case scenario was some of them actually died during those months that they were not able to come to our hospital and be seen or be operated on or get their chemotherapy done. So what did we do? We had to slowly resume operations. So this was a hard thing to battle because our hospital was essentially divided into two, which was the COVID area and the non-COVID area. And in surgery, we also had to divide our operating floor into a COVID wing and a non-COVID wing. So here in this picture, we see na ongoing yung operation in a COVID OR. So everyone is wearing PPEs, level 4 PPEs and PAPRs to ensure safety for all of the doctors and nurses in that setting. But then we also had to resume the non-COVID ORs in normal level. So we have our patients and their bantays undergo a swab and then were tested as negative. How else did we address the new normal for our patients? We also had telemed. So this was a very new thing for everyone in the hospital. So all patients had to do online consultations or consultations via phone. So the problem with this though is that our hospital really caters, it's a public hospital, so we really catered to the poorest of the poor in our area. So what nawawala dito yung patients na walang access to internet, walang access to phone. So our concern now is for them. What happens to them? Who gets to see them? We don't know that. And then in our surgery department, since our caseload was very much diminished, maybe now it's only 30% of what we used to do. So we had around 30% na lang yung ORs namin. So instead of being trained how to operate, we get online lectures instead. So I guess now our new normal, we still have to go on. We still have to treat the patients that were missed out on when the pandemic started and we had to close and only cater to COVID patients. So we have to move on. We have to operate no matter how inconvenient it is. So we look like astronauts when we're operating in the COVID suite. And then here in the middle, we look like aliens when we go inside the COVID ward. Our emergency room, well, we don't have one because our emergency room is now a COVID area. So dito lang kami sa hallway naka-place when we're catering to non-COVID emergencies. And then instead of the outpatient department, we have our telemed clinics, which is just our laptops wherever we are. So the hard part about being a doctor now in the time of COVID is that we can't talk to or touch our families in person and our friends, and which is why Zoom is a critical part of our lives. So we see a burnout. A lot of my nurse colleagues have already resigned from their job, and have chosen to pursue other fields because they thought it was not worth it to move on with their careers. We make light of the situation, even if it's very harsh. So here, as you can see, there's a very alarming hazard sign. But now, months, almost a year into the pandemic, we just poke fun at it. But it's really a hard thing to deal with this pandemic. Sometimes we have ORs that are more than 8 hours. 8 hours kasi is the recommended time that you would spend in the maximum time that you spend in PPEs. What if we have a trauma case that lasts for 12 hours? So the surgeons have to be in their level 4 PPEs for 12 hours straight. There's no water break, there's no wee-wee break, and that's super, super inconvenient. Before, we didn't have PAPRs, so it was very, very hot. Then we have to wear like 3 layers of gloves, which is very much affects our tactile sensation. So looking back, sobrang in my selfies na you can see the progression from just not wearing masks at all to having cloth masks to being in full face respirators, sobrang dire na ng situation now. I guess what I'm trying to say is that no matter what, no matter how inconvenient it is, we will continue to serve the underserved. With relation to this conference, I think peace and healthcare go hand in hand. You can't have peace without the other. And then this pandemic has shown us the great inequity of yung mga kakulangan ng bansa natin when it comes to healthcare and when it comes to peace. Everyone deserves healthcare. You know, healthcare for all, peace for all. That's what we need. And then all of the stakeholders are doing their part. But we have to hold our government, everyone accountable for ending this pandemic. Personally, I would like to go back to operating on patients all day and every day. But we need to wait for the pandemic to stop. And we need to do our part. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. De Jesus, for your sharing. Thank you for your sharing. And we thank you for your services as well. At this moment, we would like to thank our three presenters for the sharing, and let us have a 5-minute break, and we shall resume our session in 5 minutes. So everybody have a 5-minute break. See you in a bit. you. Welcome back to our session for this morning. Our session theme is COVID-19, continuing health challenges, new conflict lines, social dynamics of the new normal. We shall now proceed to give our speakers a chance to ask questions to each other or give additional input to the talks that they have just presented. You have 30 minutes for this panel discussion. Dr. Lee and Dr. De Jesus, apparently we don't have Attorney Yoson yet at the moment. Some other, maybe a rejoinder to what you have just discussed.
I think there's a question for me in the chat box. I'd like to address it na lang. So,
Dr. De Jesus, I think it does. We will go on to that later, but then this is like panel discussion. So we're asking you if you have questions for your former colleague or maybe your colleague at the moment, Dr. Lee, and you can exchange questions and maybe share thoughts on this on similar topic, but confronted by both of you in different circumstance.
Hi, Jill. Jill is my classmate. I think in terms of healthcare, we're on opposite ends. So Jill we're from the same school, from the same class, but Jill went the opposite end. She went to the very front and is in public health. Ako na residency. I think on my part, our hospital is very lucky to have a lot of resources available to us. But I think we're both still seeing a lot of inequity in healthcare. In her part, it's very hard to serve the people out there in the community without resources available to you. On our part, our hospital has been largely unavailable to cater to the patients that we used to cater to. So the subspecialties, for example, that only our hospital or very few hospitals in the country have, such as burn and trophoblastic disease, those units are closed down. So the patients who have those very, very, very specialized needs are unable to go to our hospital. So if the pandemic had been managed differently, if we had been able to address this more, we could have seen and saved those patients earlier.
Dr. Lee, go ahead, please. Ma'am, I think you need to unmute your microphone. Dr. Lee? There we go. We could not hear you. It seems to me that even with the internet connection, you are really in different circumstances.
Yes. Hi, sorry. May sounds na ba ako? Wala pa din.
Oh, yes po. Go ahead.
Wala pa din. Okay, great. Yung problem sa I'm so sorry. Ganito talagang internet namin sa province of Dinagat Islands.
No problem.
Kaya kahit na gusto namin mag-shift sa telemedicine, kahit na gusto namin mag-shift sa online consultations, actually kahit na gusto namin mag-institute ng electronic medical records at ng online na contact tracing, hindi din namin magawa-gawa. I think yung kung ano yung naramdaman ng PGH, I think nung April or May, ngayon lang din nasa start na maramdaman ng Caraga region since comparatively late compared sa the rest of the Philippines, nagkaroon ng outbreak ng COVID-19 sa Caraga. Sa start kasi is very strict ang border controls na ini-implement ng region, unified ang kanilang guidelines sa pagpasok at paglabas ng mga tao, but later on, initially dahil sa influx ng LSIs, pero afterwards because of the pressure to reopen the economy, nagkaroon din tayo ng outbreak sa Surigao City na kung nasaan yung referral center ng aming province and ng Surigao del Norte ay for the past month full capacity ang lahat ng hospitals nila. So to a different sa different na scale kung ano yung naramdaman ni na Angeli noong April and May, nagsa-start na siya ngayon na punong-puno lahat ng hospitals because of COVID, na ang mga non-COVID patients ay nasi-shift out, hindi nila nakukuha yung care na kailangan nila, and wala namang tertiary care sa buong Caraga region actually. Ang closest to get to tertiary care ang Caraga Regional Hospital, but Caraga Regional Hospital is not level 3. Level 2 ang mga patients na nangangailangan ng specialist and subspecialist care. Before, they had to go as far as Cebu or Davao na fina-facilitate namin ang paglipat sa kanila. Pero ngayon, limited pa rin ang elective OR sa SPMC, limited pa rin. Ang elective OR sa Caraga right now pero dahil nga sila lang ang tumatanggap ng mga pasyenteng ito, max capacity sila, karamihan ay na originally dahil nagagaling sila sa amin, kasi nakikita ko lang naman yung mga patients na nagagaling sa amin. Dahil nagagaling sila sa amin, malaki na ang barriers sa pag-access nila ng healthcare to begin with. Magta-travel sila ng anywhere between 1 hour to 4 hours na boat papunta sa Surigao, papunta sa mainland. Kung hindi kagandahan ang weather, wala, hihintayin mo na lang na gumanda ang weather. And once you arrive sa mainland, wala ka pa ring assurance na makukuha mo yung care na kinakailangan mo. In the end, karamihan din sa kanila ay nag-return lang din sa amin. So, ang sagot sa katanungan na anong nangyayari sa mga pasyente na hindi nakakapagpa-follow up, sa mga pasyente nating nawala noong April at noong May dahil nagkaroon ng COVID, dahil na-push out sila, dahil na-delay ang kanilang mga OR. At ang sagot ay umuwi sila sa amin at dito sila madalas ay dito din sila namamatay sa kanilang mga communities. Until now, even after ilang months na tayo na nakasarado. Hindi ako marunong magbilang. 9 months na tayo. 9 months na since tawag natin dito, since Metro Manila was placed under ECQ, since nagsikalat ang COVID sa ating bansa. Pero sa pag-build up pa rin ng testing capacity, ng capacity for isolating and managing patients, napakalaki pa rin ng inequities sa urban areas as compared sa iba. Sa Caraga region, 5 provinces, ang accredited pa lang na testing center ay isa. So hopefully magfa-follow ang Caraga Regional and ang Red Cross sa Surigao, pero right now it's just Butuan Medical Center. So lahat ng provincial health offices, municipal health offices, referral hospitals, government hospitals, and non-government hospitals within Caraga region. Dalawa pala, MJ Santos and Butuan Medical Center. Doon lang nila napapadala. Yung time na sana na bilhin natin sa pag-delay ng pagbukas ng borders, na opportunity sana na maka-build up ng testing capacities para kahit pa paano mas equipped tayo to handle the pandemic pag dumating na siya sa amin. Hindi din na-maximize dahil sa constraints sa funding, dahil sa constraints sa availability ng personnel. Because yung personnel na kinakailangan mo para magman ng mga laboratories na ito, para i-conduct ang testing, ay kadalasan wala sa loob ng, or rather, parang kadalasan ay wala sa loob ng Caraga region. Most of them nagdumipat na tumira na sa ibang urbanized centers. So, yung tawag natin dito,
Jill, I guess we just lost her connection. While waiting for her, we welcome back Attorney Christine Yuson Chavez. And Attorney, would you have to have some more thoughts on the sharing that you have given us?
Thank you, Father. And I'm sorry I wasn't able to join you earlier. I was invited to go to Lanao to help with the distribution of assistance to our beneficiaries there. And so, anyway, since I am here with very brilliant doctors, I would just like to share that since we are in a crisis right now, what based on the studies that we conducted and the studies conducted by the United Nations, it appears that one of the prevailing gender issue right now is the access to maternal health of our women. In fact, while Metro Manila was in ACQ, we had two deaths because these mothers were not given the appropriate maternal care because it was sidelined, no, because of the pandemic. So I would just like to know if the respective hospitals of our esteemed doctors here have systems in place to prioritize access to maternal health of our women.
Maybe Dr. De Jesus, if you could answer that since we still don't have Dr. Jill online.
Okay, for our hospital, the OB/GYN department, they have their own system of accepting patients, but they're largely also just accepting COVID patients. So with them, it's not a problem. As long as they have beds available, we accept the COVID positive pregnant women and gynae cases. So I think with regards to OB/GYN service, they're doing a very good job of catering to the COVID positive and cancer patients na women. What I see when I work in the emergency room beside those gynae emergency doctors is that it's what's happening also to the other departments, that we get a lot of patients coming into the emergency room who have been turned away by other hospitals. So in gynae, sometimes they have patients who are crowning already na hindi sila tinanggap ng mga 4 hospitals before they finally went to our hospital as a last resort, because in general, patients don't like to go to our emergency room because they know it's a COVID and may exposure. May expose sila for sure to COVID. But because they have been turned away by other patients, by other hospitals, they have no choice but to risk exposure and then uh, going to our hospital.
Uh,
Okay.
Dr. Lee,
Hi guys.
maybe,
Nakabalik na
yes,
ako.
welcome back. Maybe you can continue with what you were trying to say kanina as when you were cut. And then after that, if you can respond to the inquiry of Atty. Chavez asking what maternal health services have you been rendering to members of to women even despite of the currently happening pandemic?
Alright. Hindi. Didiretso na ako doon kasi related din siya sa sinasabi ko earlier. Because hindi lang naman COVID ang health problem. Hindi naman tumitigil ang panganganak ng mga tao, hindi naman nawawala ang need na magbakuna ng mga bata. Pero lahat ng mga health emergencies ay nangyayari pa rin. Lahat ng essential health services ay kinakailangang makontinue. So sa level namin sa primary care, ang routine na immunizations, ang routine na antenatal care, ang routine na reproductive health services, nagko-continue pa din sila. Pero yung mga personnel na involved, ay involved din sila sa COVID. Nag-increase ang kanilang trabaho, pero hindi nag-increase yung number ng tao na gagawa ng trabaho na yun, na nararamdaman din ng hospitals. Kasi, pero sila, parang since na yung pasyente nila ay nare-refer elsewhere or hindi nakakapunta sa kanila, tawag natin dito, iba yung extent kung paano nila nararamdaman yun. So kami, ang barangay health workers na ang role nila ay family planning education, the reproductive health education, pag-orient sa mga nanay sa infant and young child feeding, ang collect ng data, pag-report ng data. They all do that. Sila din ang nagmo-monitor ng naka-quarantine, nagbabantay ng aming quarantine facilities, ng care and containment centers. And kailangan din na ma-ensure na walang cross-contamination dito, na kung sino yung nagbabakuna at sino yung nagpiprenatal, hindi siya yung nag-handle ng COVID dapat. Kasi kung siya yung nag-handle ng COVID, siya ay nahawaan, magbibigay siya ng malaking problema sa atin kung siya yung nag-handle ng clean ng COVID cases. Pero hindi, nagsasuffer din ang mga outputs namin because kulang nga din talaga kami ng personnel. And once merong maging suspect case, once may possibility na nagkaroon na nahawaan, everyone else is affected and everyone else has to be traced. So, even though ngayon, kadalasan nangyayari na house to house ang pagpunta sa mga pasyente, affected din siya ng inequities mo geographically. Even within our province, merong poblasyon na central area, merong lugar na sobrang malayo, kailangan mo pa silang ipump boat, mga island communities na kung iisa lang ang may municipality kami, 27 ang barangays, 18 sa 27 na yun ay isla, apat lang naman ang kanilang midwives. So kung si midwife mo na isa sa kanila ay nagmo-monitor ng COVID patients, konti na lang silang mag-iikot doon sa barangays na yun as opposed sa kung full force sila nung sinuunang panahon. So isa nag-iikot na magtitingin ng COVID, yung isa nagka-quarantine kasi siya yung galing sa COVID, dalawa na lang sila mag-iikot. Anong klaseng quality ng care yung kaya mong ibigay? At the same time, tumatama kami sa cap sa budget ng personal services kasi limited lang din ng government ang amount ng budget na pwedeng gastusin ng isang office para sa personal services, para sa pag-hire ng tao. Kasi hindi naman po pwede na yung buong budget ng gobyerno mo ay pinapangsahod mo lang. So, limited lang yung number of personnel na ma-hire mo. Kung mag-hire ka ng additional personnel, wala kang assurance na may security of tenure sila, na makukuha nila yung benefits na kailangan nila at na deserving, na kung saan sila deserving. Ang isa pa din ay karamihan ng community health workers namin. They're usually women or lolas, malapit na silang umabot sa retirement age. So sila ay vulnerable populations na kailangan naming protektahan. Mahirap din na mag-demand galing sa kanila knowing na sila ay vulnerable populations and na hindi nila nakukuha yung compensation nila dapat.
Thank you po. Thank you po. Maybe some other questions from our panel for each other. May tanong pa po kayo sa isa't isa. Kayo po ba? Kayong mga doctors, may tanong sa lawyer? Kung anong nangyayari sa mga women natin?
Yan ang actual kung kasi ang napansin namin recently since the start ng pandemic, ang rise sa cases ng domestic violence, ng intimate partner violence, especially nung early months na everyone ay stuck sila at home. Ang din kasi namin, right now, ang bulk din ng labor ay napupunta sa women kasi hindi lang ang alternative kasi usually, wala naman kasi masyadong formal economies sa dinagat, pero fisheries and agriculture ang mga lalaki or mining. Pero nung nagkaroon ng, tawag natin dito, ng restrictions on movement, restrictions sa economy noong March, April, May, ang nangyayari ay ang women ang naghahanap ng alternative sources of livelihood, alternative, parang ang economy nila yung kanilang mga other services, ang kanilang mga backyard garden, ang kanilang mga online stuff. na medyo nakikita, I don't know, kasi sinishare ko lang to kasi ito yung nakikita ko. So hindi ko alam kung ito din ba ang experiences ng lahat ng ibang tao. Limited lang din ang aming sa probinsya sa Dinagat. Hindi ko din alam kung ito ba ay nare-reflect sa more urban settings.
Actually, ako as surgeon on duty, I handle medical legal cases. So, I've also been seeing almost every day meron kaming cases of domestic abuse. I don't know if that has something to do then with the fact that people are staying home so they're stuck with each other, mas nag-aaway sila. But, I'd like to get the input of our attorney about domestic abuse now.
In studies, domestic abuse is really expected to increase in times of crisis, whether health or otherwise. But our data from the time we were placed on in ECQ until the end of October, this is based on PNP data. It was actually surprising because the actual number of GBV, that's the gender-based violence cases that were filed, decreased compared to the same period last year. But we do not say that there has been an actual decrease of cases. No, we are of the strong belief that our victim survivors may have failed to report the cases of gender-based violence because probably there is limited access to transportation, or because there's a lot of offices are shut down, diba? So it could also be they do not know where to report the cases. And also, it could also be that they are locked down with their perpetrators, their husband or their boyfriend, 24/7 a day. So it may be difficult for them to run away or get the chance to go away and report the cases of abuse in the appropriate government agencies. So right now, we are trying to collate data from other concerned agencies who may possibly be responders to GBV cases, like the hospitals, the Department of Justice in terms of cases filed in the fiscal's office. Also, in the barangay, we are currently collating the gender-based violence cases filed in the barangay level.
Yes. Any other question from our panel for each other?
May question ulit ako kay attorney kasi right now, ang bulk ng interventions namin sa gender-based violence ay, tawag natin dito, alam mo yun, reactive sila. Nagtatry na mag-increase ng reporting, nag-institute ng desks ng reporting systems na unified para sa loob ng province, yung mga cases ng gender-based violence. Iisa lang ang kanilang parang referral desk na isa lang ang parang ito yung person na mag-i-interview sa'yo, one time, big time na referral lang siya, hindi yung papasahan. Kasi usually, di ba yung nangyayari, pinapapasa-pasa sila sa isa't isa. Pupunta sa PNP, bibigay sa women's desk, ibibigay sa DSWD or sa MSWD, ibibigay sa tapos ipapadala sa hospital once dumaan na sa mga taong yun. So pagdating nila sa amin, parang 5 million people na yung naka-interview na sa kanila. And sometimes after all that, hindi naman lahat ay may kakayahan na iiwan ang household nila or iiwan ang partners nila. So limited lang din so far ang interventions na nagagawa namin sa setting na ito. Basically, ano yung mas medium term? Kasi ang long term natin na preventive ay magsa-start yun sa mga kids, sa mga lalaking, especially considering our set, kung ano ang mga recommendations, ano ang ating mga pwedeng gawin, ano ang mga practices na ating nakikita.
The father, I'm sorry, I think I lost Dr. Lee when she was asking the question.
Dr. Lee,
hello.
would you like
No,
to repeat the question in a shorter way?
sige. In a shorter way. Yun,
I think my connection is unstable, if that's okay.
okay. Actually, ako din eh. Ano yung sasabihin ko? So yun, parang ang karamihan kasi ng interventions namin ay reactive. Parang ano yung mga practices, especially in crisis situations, especially sa pandemic, na pwede nating gawin, hindi lang to improve their access to. Kasi right now, yun ang ano namin, ang bulk ng interventions ay pag-improve ng access sa reporting, pag-improve ng access sa care, ensure na anyone na nagko-come forward ay nakukuha nila yung support nila. Pero sa level ng mas madaming tao ang mag-report, sa level ng mas konti ang actual na cases na nangyayari, kung ano ang recommendations, especially sa setting natin ngayon na limited ang ating movement and limited ang ating activities.
Doc, we are really pushing for the prevention on the commission of violence. So the only way, the primary way to do this is really to educate our young girls and boys on violence against women and children and how it's not okay. So currently, the Interagency Council on Violence Against Women is developing modules for seminars to be conducted all over the Philippines in the barangay level. We also currently have this group composed of men. It's called MOVE. It's called Men Opposed to Violence. So these are men grouping themselves together and helping the women in its advocacy to fight violence against women. So that's it, Doc. Education is key. We need to educate our younger generation on gender-based violence.
All right. Thank you very much Thank you very much for that panel. Let's now proceed with the open forum, and we shall entertain questions from our participants in this conference. For the open forum, the Zoom participants may write their questions in the chat box. And for those who are participating and following us through FB Live and YouTube Live, you may write your questions in the comment section. The Secretariat will keep track of your questions and they'll forward it to us. And then for those of you who are asking questions, please indicate the name of your organization and to the person you would like to ask the question. You may ask a direct question, a concise one, and if needed, one follow-up question. Now, I shall now read some questions from our Zoom participants. First is, in your own field of experience, what new conflict lines have you seen? Of course, we have already discussed domestic abuse, but what other conflict lines have you seen that is like a product of what's happening because of COVID-19? Maybe about resources allocation in the case of hospitals, and other than the very major serious issue of domestic violence, what new conflict lines have you seen and what conflict management strategies have you done? Can we start with Dr. Lee?
Okay, sorry pinatay ko na lang ang video para mas hindi ako kumakain ng aming limited bandwidth.
Okay po.
Right now, medyo mahirap din sagutin ang question na ito kasi hindi siya necessarily new conflict lines as much as existing na sila na conflicts, existing na problems, existing na inequities na mas napalala dahil sa pandemic, hindi lang sa access ng mga tao sa care, pero pati sa kanilang economic conditions. Yung nangyari lang ay ang mga taong uh, na nabubuhay sa subsistence is mas lalo silang na-place at a disadvantage. Ang change din sa ating pag-access ng information. For instance, ang dami na sa ating nag-shift sa electronic everything, sa virtual na learning, sa online classes, online meetings, even itong conference na ito. Pero yung mga walang access sa technology, sorry about our internet again, pero I think siya din ay nag-highlight ng ito ay, mas parang in the future, baka i-expect natin na ang mas malala ang inequity sa education sa kids na natututo ngayon. Isipin niyo ako ay nasa capital and this is like our provincial capital internet and our provincial capital internet is like this. So paano pa ang mga kids namin na nasa bundok, na nasa mga isla, na lalo silang walang access, lalo silang mapag-iiwan. So napag-iiwanan na sila to begin with, mas lalo pa silang napapag-iiwanan.
Maybe added to that na tanong na lang, Dr. Lee, nagkagulo ba yung mga tao nung merong limited na resources? May pagkakataon ba nag-away sila dahil kokonti lang yung nagagamit nila to address their COVID-related needs? We seem to have lost her connection at the moment. So maybe let's get back with Dr. Lee. Dr. De Jesus, anong new conflict lines po yung nakikita nyo given the COVID-19 pandemic, and what possible conflict management interventions have you have done, or maybe your institution has done in response to those? Hindi po namin kayo naririnig. Dr. De Jesus, please.
Ayan.
There we go.
So to add to what Jill mentioned earlier, access to internet is a big thing because we have largely shifted to telemedicine in our hospital. But prior to the pandemic, we are a public hospital first and foremost, and we cater to the poorest of the poor. So even if we're in an urban area, meron pa rin kaming mga urban poor patients. So before, I would see in our outpatient department, meron talaga kaming patients who would come in with very dirty clothes, who came from the streets, mga vagrants even. So those are the kinds of patients that we would cater to, who obviously they don't have cell phones. They don't have cell phones to be able to be called by their doctors for telemed. They don't have internet to log into our database. So I don't know if they are being catered to, if other hospitals are able to serve those patients as well. What we're doing now to address that is we're slowly opening up our outpatient department. So we have very, very few limited slots per day na outpatient who cannot log into our telemedicine hub. So that's at least a little bit, it's going back to normal. Another concern pala that this pandemic has brought about, it's very new. Me in the trauma bay, at the start of the pandemic, I had a lot of patients come in for caustic ingestion. So yun yung mga cases na umiinom sila ng muriatic acid. And who are those patients na I saw? Almost one every duty ko, merong umiinom ng muriatic acid. And the common profile are they're the very low-income patients na, for example, I've had 3 jeepney drivers na dahil nung start of the lockdown, bawal ng public transportation, their whole livelihood was taken away from them. And usually, they're the breadwinners of the family. So, sobrang laking burden for them to be the sole breadwinner and not have income. So they just resorted to attempted suicide. So that's also something to think about, that the this pandemic has caused for our patients. Thank you.
Attorney Yuson, please. Yuson Chavez, please.
Internally, since internally, I mean within the Philippine Commission on Women, since we are more on the policy making body on gender inequality. So what is required of us is technical assistance and capacity building on gender inequality. So we are more often than not asked to give lectures. But since the pandemic, we cannot go around anymore. But since the demand for technical assistance is still there, we had to increase our IT capacity, bandwidth, equipment for our technical officers, including orientation for those who do not know yet how to operate this equipment, no, in order to capacitate them to transfer our services online. Internally also, we have noticed that although in our office there were only around 2 or 3 personnel who were infected with the coronavirus, but this has in a way affected the mental health of most of the employees inside. We have heard of staff being burned out, feeling anxious, and other mental health concerns. So we are currently in the hunt for a psychosocial service provider to respond to the issues of our staff inside. Um, Outside of our agency, we have, based on studies that have been conducted while on lockdown, it seems that there is a concern on unpaid care work because there has been a very high increase in the number of hours that women devote to unpaid care work. This is probably due to the fact that the schools are closed, so they have to take care of the children 24/7. Unlike during those times when kids are in school majority of the day, but right now they are at home and the mothers have to take care of them. Um, there has also been this is public knowledge that there is a great concern of our women micro entrepreneurs in terms of livelihoods. So many women have lost their small businesses. So our government is responding by um, giving out small or doable livelihood packages for our women micro entrepreneurs to help them ride out this pandemic.
Yes, we have another question from one of our participants, and the question is, how does women's participation in peace building look like to you, especially in the conflict areas that need urgent attention? How will women tip the scale for peace in Mindanao? Meaning, in your own context, how does this happen? How do women contribute to peace building?
It is very important that women are equally represented in the peace panel discussion because and so we need to push for this whenever there is a group created in order to with the agenda to to create peace in that area. It is necessary that we push for an equal representation of women to sit in that panel in order that the women's concerns and women's welfare is surfaced and addressed while we are drafting the peace agenda. Because currently, women are really underrepresented in all the policy making and decision making policies, and because of that, the concerns of women and young girls are not properly addressed and voiced out. So the only way for us to do that is to have equal representation in these groups.
Dr. De Jesus, contributions of women in peace building in your area? Ay, we couldn't hear you po.
In my field, actually, there's not much disparity in gender in terms of surgery and in terms of hospital administration. I'm lucky to be in an institution that's very gender egalitarian. Even in surgery, where it used to be a male-dominated field, at least where I'm at now, it's pretty much equal. So I'm very lucky in that sense.
Yes. Dr. De Jesus, no,
Yes.
Dr. Lee,
Hi.
can we hear from you?
Yes. Okay, hi, I'm back. May sounds na ba ako ulit?
Yes po.
Alright. Gusto ko lang mag-hop on din sa sinabi ni Attorney Chavez na about sa additional sa increase sa unpaid and unrecognized kadalasan na labor na ginagawa ng women. Kasi since lahat nga ng kids ay at home na and or hindi na sila pumapasok sa school, ang burden ng pag-alaga sa kanila ay napapasa sa mothers. So, ang tendency din is kahit na parehas na parents ay working, ang bulk pa rin ng responsibility sa childcare ay na-foist sa mother, whether ito ay dahil sanay na ang tatay na ganyan talaga ang kanilang division of labor sa household, very patriarchal pa rin ang kanilang pagtingin, and ang daming women din na aside from na wawalan sila ng income hindi lang ang entrepreneurs ang nawawalan ng income sa businesses, means yung iba they end up quit yung mga formally employed, they end up not being able to go to work. So dito sa capital medyo mukha na kaming daycare kasi yung kids dinadala na lang ng mga parents nila, ng mga mothers nila papunta dito na sila nagmo-module sa capital, sila yung kumakain din ng aming bandwidth at kumakain ng aming space, which is fine din naman, but yung role din na nape-play ng women sa governance, sa economy, even sa health ay limited sa kung gaano ka-supportive ang kanilang environment, kung gaano ka-supportive ang structures around them. Nakakapasok yung mga empleyado naming mothers, even though nag-aalaga sila ng kids, kasi we try to make an environment na okay sa kanila, acceptable na dala-dala nila yung kids nila, tapos yung office de facto babysitters. Pero kailangan din natin na para sa greater involvement, kailangan din natin i-approach ang pag-structure ng ating environment, ang composition ng ating workplaces. Hindi lang sa composition ng ating workplaces na may equality ka sa numbers, pero na even within the numbers, lahat ng needs nila ay nako-consider. Kasi for instance, kung tama naman yung numbers mo, pero the moment na like sa DOH, sa Nurse Deployment Project, hindi contractual sila, wala silang maternity leave. So ang kadalasan, the moment na nabuntis ang nurse ay nag-end of contract sila. So waste siya ng resources just because you don't support your people, just because hindi ka nag-adjust sa pangangailangan nila based on their gender.
Thank you po. We have another question from our Zoom participants. The first question is, how did the management, meaning the hospital management, address the scarcity of the health workers in a public facility such as your hospital? And how is the mental health of the frontliners as you assess them? For both of you, Dr. De Jesus and Dr. Lee.
In our hospital, there have been a lot of resignations, especially for nurses and nurse aides. I think it's a matter of burnout and there's not a lot of reassurance that they will be safe from the COVID, because we became a COVID referral center, and that was shoved onto our faces. So, because we're a big hospital, we were able to hire new replacements for those people. But I think the problem naman was in training. So we had a lot of new nurses, new staff that we had to train agad, and they had to be ready and have their foot on the ground running agad when they were newly hired. So I think that was the problem. Um, the other question on health, on mental health, in our hospital, our department of psychiatry, they have a hotline readily available for our health workers, so that they would be able to call if they're feeling frontliner fatigue, yung tawag nila doon. And they've had several sessions na by department naman, just to check up on our mental health. I think that's helped greatly for us.
Thank you po. Dr. Lee?
Hi. So, yung problem sa amin, we also try to conduct na sa personnel namin, merong trained sa mental health and psychosocial support, and we really do try to conduct parang we try to check in sa aming frontliners, kamusta na sila, kamusta ang stress levels nila ngayong panahon ng pandemya, hindi lang sa within the health sector, pero ang iba't ibang frontliners namin sa iba't ibang fields, ang mga taga-PNP, ang taga-BFP, ang mga MDRR and PDRRMO namin na first responders, ang mga bahalang mag-drive ng aming sea ambulance. Pero nag-burnout din ang aming physicians kasi pagdating din sa kanila ay kailangan din i-address ang kanilang concerns. Most of our physicians here sa aming rural health units ay doctors to the barrios sila. First job nila karamihan. So isipin mo na kakagraduate mo sa medical school, sinapak ka sa trabaho. So dito tapos napadpad ka sa isla na hindi mo naman ine-expect na isang taon mo hindi makikita ang pamilya mo kasi bawal lumabas at bawal lumipad. At kung ikaw ay babalik, ikaw ay magka-quarantine ng 14 days. Hindi siya madali for any of them. And even though we try na mag-intervene, na nag-check-in kami, may hotlines kami and may contacts kami sa isa't isa, nagsistress relief, whatever kami. Pero limited din ang kayang gawin yan habang nagko-continue lang din ang ating pandemic. Ano yung sasabihin ko? Ang sasabihin ko din ay, dadagdagan ko yung sinabi ni Angeli kasi ang mahirap sa pag-hire ng bagong tao ay yun, kailangan mo silang i-train. Kasi kung hindi ka assured na marunong sila, for instance, pinaka-basic na level na marunong sila magsuot ng PPE na maayos, mataas ang chance na sila mismo yung mahahawaan na sila mismo ang magkalat ng COVID. So, at least sa PGH and sa ibang hospitals and sa ibang areas na placed under ECQ, meron silang additional na funding para sa supplementation ng health workforce. Kami wala. So kung sino kami at the start, kami pa rin yun hanggang ngayon.
Very much. Now, our facilitator, Father Garrido, Father Alner, shall present the questions from our FB Live and YouTube participants. Father Garrido, please. Yes.
Morning to our speakers. We have a question here addressed for maybe both for the three of you from Cheat Assis. The question is, what is your assessment on the government's response to this pandemic? And if I may add, what are your recommendations and suggestions? So we'll be first. We will go first to Attorney Christine Chavez.
Okay, thank you, Father. Thank you to Ms. Chit for that question. Personally, I feel that the the government is responding well to our current situation. The government is doing the best it can possibly
Hello?
by this pandemic. If at all, what I would want to suggest for the government to do is to have a woman representative in the IATF, because currently none of the IATF officials is a woman. So our women are not properly represented in the group. And thus, women's concerns in this pandemic, which is so many, may not have been surfaced within the group, and may not have been considered while they were crafting the guidelines in response to the current situation.
Thank
That's
you.
all from me, Father.
How about our doctors? Dr. De Jesus?
Well, I'm not a public health expert, so I can't really say how well the government handled this. But in terms of our hospital, I'm not completely in agreement that we were turned into a COVID referral center. My personal opinion is that as a large tertiary center, our service would have been better handled, still catering to those subspecialty. It was a good decision at the time to turn us into a COVID referral center because we have a lot of doctors and staff that are readily available and easily trainable to handle COVID at that time. But now that we're seeing the patients who were left behind, the non-COVID patients, the cancer patients, the trophoblastic disease patients who have been neglected for months, I would like to see that their needs are addressed as well. So maybe we can look for another COVID center, try infrastructure to handle just COVID cases. We're doing our best naman. We're opening non-COVID cases, but it's in my opinion that we could have handled it better.
Thank you, Dr. De Jesus. How about Dr. Lee? Dr. Lee, are you
Hey,
still
yeah.
okay?
Okay, pero may sinasabi siyang your internet connection is unstable. Pero sige lang. Sa PGH pa lang, I agree with Angeli na to begin with, ayaw mo na yung end referral center mo. Kasi sa PGH, doon talaga pinapadala lahat ng pasyente na ang mga ibang ospital, wala silang idea kung anong gagawin sa kanila. Lalong sa kanila pinapadala kung ang mga pasyenteng ito ay indigent. Hindi naman din talaga siya yung appropriate na end referral. Especially kasi ang dami niyang patients na siya lang ang makakaasikaso ng mga pangangailangan nila. The same way na sa Caraga, sa Surigao del Norte, for instance, ang original nila na COVID referral ay ang Surigao del Norte, sorry, nandiyan pa ba ako?
Yes. So, continue.
Okay. Ang original nila na referral ay ang Surigao del Norte Provincial Hospital na lahat ng COVID dito kayo pupunta to free up your end referral na, which is Caraga Regional Hospital, na parehas pa rin sila hanggang ngayon, wala pang testing facility. Kasi ayaw mo na, gusto mo as much as possible ang mag-establish ng gatekeeping between health facilities. Hindi naman natin gusto na lahat ng COVID cases ay mapupunta sa itong hospital na ito. Ma-overwhelm ang hospital. Hindi niya makakaya ng asikasuhin yung mga pasyente niya. Hindi niya kayang maasikaso yung influx ng bagong patients. Kaya ang pinaka-important na way na pag-address ng tawag natin dito ng COVID-19 ay nasa primary care, sa ating rural health units, sa ating district hospitals, sa pag-establish ng community isolation units. which we started on rather late na sa pandemic. And before, ang problem din natin ay iba-iba din ang capacities ng ating local governments to establish those units, to establish those facilities. Sa province pa lang namin na 16 na doctors, paano namin madidistribute ang aming workforce in a way na lahat sila ay makikita na mabibigyan ng care ang COVID-19 patients pero hindi mo napapabayaan lahat ng ibang patients mo, na ang doktor mo din ay nakakapagpahinga at may quarantine period siya in between seeing your COVID cases and seeing other cases. Ang pag-spread din ng COVID-19, if you remember no March, April, May, ang bulk ng ating COVID-19 cases ay nasa major urban centers na yun naman talaga ang places where you expect a pandemic to spread. Pero nung nagsimula ang pagpapauwi ng mga tao, ang kanilang hatid tulong sa tsaka pa lang nag-start ng outbreak sa Butuan, for instance. Tsaka lang nag-start ang outbreak sa Surigao City. Na by that time, at that point in time, wala din silang facilities for testing, wala din silang capability to isolate. And by and large, ang bulk ng attention pa rin ng ating funding ng ating national government ay ang sa pag-construct ng mega facilities, ay focused sa urban centers na hindi nabigyan ng pansin ang mga rural areas hanggang hindi pa dumadating doon ang COVID. May time nga na gusto pa ng Department of Health na mag-pull out ng doctors to the various from rural communities na dalhin sa tertiary sa hospitals sa iilang mga cities kasi yung cities na yun ay na-overwhelm na ng COVID-19 patients. Pero hindi na consider kung ano yung impact sa mga communities na naiiwan nila. Ang karamihan pa rin ng attention sa pag-address ng pandemic ay sa mga major urban centers natin. Sa Metro Manila, sa contact tracing effort sa Baguio, sa ngayon ang Davao ay dangerously nearing na silang mag-max ng ICU, MEC-vent, and hospital capacity. Bumalik na sila sa GCQ. Pero hindi nakikita ang communities na nasa laylayan and hindi lang sila na-affectahin na pupunta sa kanilang COVID. Ang limitation sa access to healthcare in Davao and Cebu will affect our patients from Dinagat. Kasi doon ang mga end referral centers nila, hindi na sila umaabot sa PGH, SPMC, or Vicente Soto lang sila sa Cebu. So, in the future, ang gusto kasi sana natin ay mabigyang kahalagahan ang healthcare at all levels, hindi lang sa time na na-detect mo siya at kailangan mo siyang i-isolate at kailangan mo siyang i-hospital at kailangan mo siyang gamutin. Pati ang contacts niya, pati ang pag-ensure na ang community ay hindi affected, pati ang pag-ensure ng regular health services sa the rest of the community, pati sa pag-ensure na ang community na yan ay may livelihood pa at kaya nilang pakainin ang mga anak nila para hindi sila maging malnourished. So, hindi siya health concern alone and hindi siya at ang response mo sa pandemic ay hindi lang siya magagawa sa pag-impose ng quarantine measures and sa pag-bulk up ng hospitals and sa pag-impose ng restrictions.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. As a follow-up, medyo mahirap talaga ngayon pumunta ng hospital. Aside from natatakot yung iba that they will be found out baka maging positive or usually it's really hard to go to the hospitals nowadays. So many protocols. In fact, I am having my Santa Lana or sacrament for the sick, and it's so hard to enter the hospital with so many papers. Now, the question is very basic for the doctors, knowing that this is what our new normal is. A question from Connie Casinas: how can we maintain to stay healthy during this pandemic? Because that's the best way to avoid. Any of you doctors can answer. How to... sige. Go.
Ay, hindi. Sige, go lang.
What steps can
Um,
doctors take to stay healthy or for people to stay healthy during this pandemic?
um, so yun, yung pinaka-basic pa rin na reminders ng Department of Health, ang pagsuot sa face mask, ang hand hygiene, ang pag-iwas sa crowds, sila ay applicable pa rin. Ang ina-advise din natin before sa proper nutrition, sa pag-exercise, sa pag-maintain ng lifestyle na mababa ang risks, na healthy, ay applicable pa rin hanggang ngayon. Wala namang biglaang nag-change sa ating advice dahil lang may COVID-19, and likely na magko-continue pa rin tayo sa state na ito hanggang hindi pa natin nakokontrol ang pandemic. Para i-expect na natin na forever na tayong nag-face mask at forever na tayong physical distancing pag tayo ay lumalabas. Unfortunately, sa karamihan ng tao, kahit ang mga bagay na ito, kahit ang pag-ensure ng proper nutrition, kahit na pag-ensure ng tamang diet, na kumakain sila ng gulay at kumakain ng prutas, ay wala sa kanilang control. At doon dapat nagsistep in ang role ng ating municipal and provincial and national governments sa bigay ng environment na nag-enable sa mga tao na na kaya nilang gawin ang mga behaviors na nakakatulong sa kanilang health.
Okay, thank you, Dr. De Jesus.
I think perfect na yung sinabi ni Jill. That's pretty much what it is. I think what I have to add also is that huwag tayong maging lenient just because nag-lift na yung mga quarantine establishments are more open doesn't mean that we can be relaxed na in our quarantining ourselves. As much as possible, stay at home pa rin. And let's also try to avoid yung mga preventable injuries. For example, me as a trauma surgeon, ang dami ko pa rin nakikita when the community quarantine was lifted na bumabalik yung mga tao sa dating gawin nila na nagiinuman, nagda-drive drunk, nagsasapakan, nagsusuntukan, nagsasaksakan. So those are the cases that I handle in the trauma bay. Those are completely preventable things. And dahil na-injure sila, they need emergency services, they have to go to the hospital where they risk exposure. So those are things na we have to take it upon ourselves na hinay-hinay sa prevent things that can be prevented to minimize your risk of exposure.
Okay, thank you. One last question for me before I will turn you over to Father Michael. To Attorney Chavez, although it can be applied also for the doctors. Question from Dino Pineda. Nowadays, it's hard to make protest movements, no, as a way of raising our voice. What can we say about protest movements, no, especially doctors? And Attorney Chavez.
Father, what is the question? What is it referring to? Like protest because of the issue on the
health
anti-terrorism
subsidies, no, like greater state subsidies for health, for example. Because
so the our viewer would like to know how they can still protest.
and they are asking also the side of the doctors what they think also about this. If we try to make some protest movements, especially on asking for greater state subsidy for health, are the doctors okay with this? And what is your opinion also, Attorney Chavez, for this?
If you just intend to convey your views or suggestions on certain policies or programs of the government, either because you're for or against it, you if you want to change it, you can write directly to the agency concerned. You outline therein what are the specific changes that you want, and if you have suggestions also on how to do it, that would be good as well. because considering that we already are, our government officials are already facing so much issues, maybe brilliant ideas from our citizens would greatly help on how we can further create policies and programs that would benefit the people.
Okay, thank you. Attorney, doctors, any comment or opinion?
Ako, sorry. Ang sabihin ko lang din ay, like all things, ang protests ay may kanyang kaakibat na risks. But of course, essential din na part ang pag-express ng iyong dissent, pag-express ng iyong criticisms, and kaya namang gawin in a way na minimize ang danger sa iba. And di hamak na better naman na ginagawa, kasi wala namang zero risk activity. Pati ang pagstay sa bahay at pagpapadeliver ng pagkain ay hindi naman yan zero risk activity. Ang ina-assess lang natin ay kung ang risks na ginagawa natin, sino ang involved, paano mo ginagawa ang activities in a way na kaya mong i-meet ang iyong objectives, pero hindi sa isang way na mapapahamak ang community mo, and di hamak din naman na mas justifiable and mas acceptable ang pag-protest para i-address, kasi in the end, kailangan mong i-address ang conditions na nag-give rise sa ating pandemic. Kailangan mong i-address ang governance, ang policy making ng ating bansa para mag-move tayo para sa better na outcomes, and ang pag-protest ay part doon. So, responsibility din siya. Responsibility din syempre na gawin in a way to minimize infection transmission to other people. Yun lang.
Dr. De Jesus, you have something to share?
Ako din, I agree with this. Maybe biased kami kasi we're both scholar ng bayan, but I will always advocate for care for all. And I will always encourage everyone to hold our government accountable for yung mga kakulangan. Do I agree with physical protests? Maybe not at this time. So, I'm sure everyone saw yung protests dun sa UP. I commend them because they, at least in pictures, I don't know if in real life, in pictures mukha naman silang socially distanced. But I think now we have to be more creative in the ways that we have our government take notice of our health concerns. So, other than protesting physically, I'm sure may mga other more creative ways online, or as Attorney said, writing letters to your government officials. I think we can also use that. But always, we have to advocate for health.
Okay, thank you, our speakers. I give you back to Father Michael Abellanosa.
Thank you. It's been a worthwhile listening to the exchange of ideas between our panel and our participants. At this point, before we end the session, we would like to listen to the short closing messages of our speakers. Maybe let's frame it in such a way that the message is coming from a woman to your fellow women and for the rest of the general public. From a woman to women and for the rest of the general public. Shall we start with Attorney Chavez, please?
I would just like to thank once again this university for inviting PCW to share our inputs on women and its role on peace building. The primary goal of our advocacy is just really to ensure that women are properly represented in all panels where there is decision making and policy making, in order that all the concerns of women and their welfare are heard and are properly addressed. So with that, if we have viewers here who are members of peace panels. I urge you to fight for and to encourage the equal representation of women in this panel. Um, as for gender-based violence, I encourage also our viewers to encourage the victim survivors that you know, or if you are a victim survivor yourself, please go to the nearest barangay or the PNP to report the incidents of abuse. Do not wait until it is too late already to stop the incidents of abuse. So that's all. Thank you very much.
Salamat kayo, attorney. May we listen now to Attorney Lee, Dr. Lee.
Okay. Hi. So, muli, gusto ko din pasalamatan ang Father Saturnino Urios University. Gusto ko pong pasalamatan ang organizers at kayong lahat sa pag-invite sa amin ngayon and sa pakikinig sa ating discussion. Sana meron tayong nakuha. Kasi ako, madami din akong nakuhang insights sa ating discussion sa ibang panelists. So sana kayo rin na maging stepping stone sa kung paano tayo mag-adjust sa ating life with COVID-19. And sana ang takeaway lang din naman today ay ang mga concerns ng pangkalusugan ay hindi lang sila limited sa realm ng pangkalusugan. Kasi I think yung concern ng karamihan ng tao sa panahon ngayon ay medyo helpless sila. Feeling nila trapped sila, parang natatakot silang mahawaan sila ng COVID, limited ang kanilang movement, limited ang kanilang kailangan gawin, wala silang contact sa kanilang family. Lahat yan ay nagtitake ng toll sa'yo mentally and emotionally. And lalong nadadagdagan kasi feeling nila wala silang nakakontribute. Ang pag-address ng pandemic ay responsibility ng nasa gobyerno at responsibility ng mga doktor. Hindi po yung totoo. So yan lang din sana ang gusto kong ipaalala sa mga nakikinig ngayon. So muli, maraming salamat.
Salamat, Dr. Lee. Finally, let's listen to Dr. De Jesus.
Okay, so thank you for inviting me to this panel, and I'm very inspired by everyone here. Working very hard in different fields. In public health, in women's rights, in healthcare. So it's very inspiring to see that there are so many people who are able and waits for Filipino people. During these times, it's easy to be disheartened because everyone, as just said, is feeling helpless. But it's reassuring to know that there are things like this, there are panels like this, there are platforms where people can express and are able to share what they're doing in order to help each other, to help the country, to help ourselves, to help people uplift themselves. So I think let's continue doing our best.
Thank you. Salamat. At this point, we shall now present the certificate of appreciation to our speakers. And let me read the citation. Father Saturnino Urios University, in partnership with Deutsche Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit, GIZ, presents the certificate of appreciation to our speakers, Dr. Jillian Francis Lee, Attorney Christine Rosemary Yuson Chavez, Dr. Angeli Jesus, for the invaluable service and contribution as presenters in the session on COVID-19, continuing health challenges, new conflict lines, social dynamics, and new normal during the Mindanao Peace Studies Conference 6 with the theme, Peace for Mindanao in the New Normal, given this 25th of November 2020 at the Father Saturnino Urios University, Butuan City, Philippines. Signed, Gunil Roof, Principal Advisor of UCAP, of the Deutsche Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit. Dankeschön, Gunil. Signed by Reverend Father Randy Jasper Chige, Vice President for Academics of this university, and signed by our University President, Reverend Father John Christian Young. We will email to you our certificates of recognition, appreciation soonest. Thank you very much. And salamat kayo sa inyo, sa inyong pagtambong o sa paghatag sa inyong higayon para niining atong pakikinabit. Bisaya po yun, Atty. De Jesus. We were just saying, thank you for giving your time for us. I now turn you over to Father Garrido for the closing of this session.
Thank you, Father Michael. Salamat again to our beauty and brains presenters, Dr. Jillian Francis Lee, Attorney Christine Rosary Chavez, Dr. Angeli De Jesus. Thank you as well to our participants. Before we end our session, we would like to invite everyone to this afternoon session with a theme, Peace, Education, and Digital Divide during the time of COVID-19. To receive your certificate of participation, please answer the evaluation through the QR code link shared in the chat box and in the comment section for the FB Live participants. The QR code link will also be shown on the screen. Okay. That ends the 5th session of the Mindanao Peace Studies Conference 6. Once again, we would like to acknowledge the lead partners of Mindanao Peace Studies Conference 6, the Father Saturnino Orius University, and the Deutsche Gesellschaft für Internationale Zusammenarbeit GIZ. Thank you everyone for your active participation. See you this afternoon. God bless and peace be with you.